Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
How do you build trust within an organization? You're an outsider. You come in. You're gonna upend things or shake things up or whatever metaphor you want to use. So there's that piece of it, because there may be some internal resistance. People may be suspicious or skeptical, and then what happens if the culture or the people in the organization on the back end of your plan aren't following through, aren't executing?
Yeah. So there's a level of answers to that. In some cases, they don't have anybody executing. And so, they really are welcoming this for us to come in and build a team. Now, there definitely are instances where we've been asked to come in, and an organization does. They might even be working with a third party, outside person who they thought that was their role. Or they may have somebody internally who secretly, felt like, hey, I'm the strategist. And so there are some politics. There are some, eggshells to walk on occasionally. It certainly happens. But it happens less than you would think. What we have found is in a lot of these organizations that are just kind of go, they're growing pretty quickly, but there is no strategic thought. I mean, they've hired a couple people to do social media or, internally, or to write the newsletter or whatever task might be. Well, those people are kind of out there dying. I mean, they're getting no direction. There's nobody really managing them. They're just being asked to do a bunch of random tactics internally. We have found in many cases, those people are our biggest champions. I mean, they're like, finally, somebody's, I've been saying strategy. Nobody's listening, but now somebody from the outside is helping, the company turn that ship around, and is actually got us focused on doing the right things as opposed to just kind of rowing the boat.
And so what about how do you overcome resistance if there is resistance? I mean, you're saying that you don't really encounter that much, and people are welcoming to you and all of that. But in those instances where you've got a plan and people aren't doing it, what do you do? What do you do in that situation?
So again, if you've created the right relationship, and I keep going back to it, I mean, forcing people to go through this strategy process really helps put us in charge. We're not just one of the cogs. We're actually asked to kind of run the whole machine. And we've had frank conversations. People have had third-party vendors that are very resistant, and we've actually invited them to seek a new client. We've had internal team members that will not get on board, and part of our job is to actually manage that. Or we've been asked to manage that team. We've had some instances where we've been given the latitude to say, I don't think this is the right person.
And how long should this relationship go on? I mean, you come in, you formulate a strategy. In some cases, you're doing the fulfillment yourself. How long should people expect for this relationship to continue? Is this indefinite? Is there a sort of expiration date? How do you think about that?
So there are two answers
to that question. Is what do you see as the client retention time amongst your agencies typically? In addition to Greg's question, what should be
so I'll answer yours,
and then what is the reality of it?
The reality is 19 months is the retention inside of the agencies that take this approach, which is 3 times the industry average probably. In our agency, it's far greater than that. I mean, we've had clients for decades now, and so there are really 2 answers to this, because we've also had folks where we have folks that we have grown with and we've matured their marketing, and we play maybe just an advisor role because we've helped them build a team internally, because I ultimately think that's what a company needs to do. And not every specialty, but they ultimately need to have once they grow to a certain size, $50 million company needs to have a marketing team internally, even if they're going out and getting expertise in certain, areas that like paid search, things that change so dramatically every week. But we have folks that we have stayed with, as I said, for years, and we just mature and kind of re-up. I mean, marketing never ends. It's just evolving. And then we've had actually people that, within about a year to 18 months, we've actually made ourselves obsolete. Even if they just, want to go into the 45-minute chat once a month, they really kind of have everything running, internally. And we've played, and I believe the fractional CMO role has the opportunity to do this. We've played a large part in helping them build that team, even going as far as like a CMO might, interviewing the folks and writing the responsibilities for, a role that we might fill. So I see that as part of this role, is that you can and will and probably should attract clients that you basically grow to the point where they don't need you anymore.
How often, as we're sort of coming to the end of our time, how often should agencies, companies, your clients, the people that you work with, revisit their strategy? What's the recommendation there?
Well, a lot of people do the annual plan, right? And I think that's, there's some validity to that. I mean, it's just sort of a fake date on a calendar, but there's some validity to that. Most of the folks that we work with, frankly, it's every 90 days. We are at least asking ourselves, like, is this working? Are we on the right track? What's next? Again, we're working with folks that are maybe growing pretty rapidly, or they're trying a lot of things. We're experimenting with some new things. And I would say every 90 days, we are taking a good hard look at what our next priorities need to be, as opposed to, just kind of working the plan.
That raises a question in my mind, which is, how do you evaluate success, right?
Sure.
Some of these things that you're recommending are going to take time. Often customers are quite impatient.
Yeah.
How do you, I guess there's two questions. How are you evaluating success? What metrics or measurements or sort of milestones are you looking at? And then how do you condition them or manage their expectations so that they give you, this is a version of what David asked earlier, that they give you the time that you need for the plan to take hold?
So we have about 14 metrics that we attempt to measure. I say attempt because, as I'm sure you've all seen, access to the data to actually make those measurements can be non-existent. And, things like customer acquisition cost is one, and lifetime value. Those are two metrics that I think are gold for a lot of organizations, but getting even a baseline of that can take a long time. So one of the things that I think helps by this is when they realize the things they should be tracking and they're not tracking, and we at least start that conversation on day one. I think it really helps cement the fact that they've got a lot of stuff broken, and that, when you're fixing things, it's going to take a little while to ramp up. So for us, it's communication. I think that's a place where a lot of agencies let their clients down, or we hear that all the time. They never told us anything, or they sent us a monthly report that didn't make any sense to us. So setting the right expectation, talking about metrics early on, because it just shows the gaps they have, and then, over communicating, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis is part of what I think has led to our success. But metrics, if I always tell people, if you're talking to an agency and they're not talking about, some of those key metrics of success, then, you might want to start asking some questions.
Yep.
So before we go to the final question, which is kind of open-ended, David or Mike, do you have anything that you didn't get a chance to ask?
Yeah, I had one question specific to the data that you collected in the survey, John. So if I read the survey properly, the fractional CMOs that you interviewed rated depth of industry knowledge as number 5, basically not five among 8 or something. Yeah. Not super important to their success. And yet the clients that you surveyed rated it number 2, which I thought was a pretty big gap. So how do you square the I don't need to be an expert, but clients are hiring me for my expertise? How do you kind of square that discrepancy?
Yeah, I'm so glad you pointed that out, because that was one of my favorite kind of comparisons because I've seen it over the years forever. I mean, we always have clients that in the process of talking or discovery, that will want to know, well, how much experience do you have in my industry? And there certainly are a lot of agencies out there now putting themselves out as we are the agency that only works with XYZ. And so I think there's a little perception from the client that that's a good thing or that that's a necessary thing. And at least I've always felt, and this is certainly whether people buy it or not, this is certainly what we lean on. And I think it's why you saw the agencies saying it was way down the list. I think that's less important than a client believes, and that you can make a real case for a breadth of industry knowledge actually being more important because that's the way you're going to bring innovation. A lot of agencies that are selling to, HVAC contractors only, well, they're trotting out the same campaigns the same way, that's worked for every business. And there's really
everybody's
no
selling the
innovative
same way in the same industry. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yep. So that's how I combat it. Whether a client buys that or not, is up to them. But I think it's a valid argument, and I think it's why you saw the agencies put it so low.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what about you? Do you have any last?
I have a question. The only question I have is about reporting, but it's probably a whole nother podcast. So,
join us next week for podcast 152A.
Exactly. So, I want to throw in this question, which is kind of inevitable and maybe even perfunctory at this point, and it's a podcast unto itself. But just if you could give us your perspective on where AI fits in this mix of not necessarily tactics but strategy and the in the evolving relationship between marketers and their customers and your work.
So we are heavy users of the AI tools as assistants, as efficiency creators, as volume creators in certain things, but they are very much married with strategy. And I think that in a lot of ways, when you get a tool like this that has a lot of people who really don't know much about marketing saying, look what I can do, it makes the need for strategy, for context, for somebody who can actually use these tools in a way that's going to benefit the business as opposed to just put a bunch more garbage out, it is probably going to be more necessary than ever. It's almost like this tool, I think this tool makes people that are providing context and strategy and humanizing marketing maybe more important than ever. I mean, I'll say the same thing next week when the next new technology wave comes out, but I certainly see, that is actually enhancing what we do. But then just from a pure practical standpoint, I mean, we are using it to produce a lot of content volume, but the real key is that none of the tools are really that good at producing, say, original content. But if you've got original content, you've got tone, you've got voice, you've got point of view, you've got expertise in original content, they're really, really good at taking that and putting it in a lot of formats and putting it in a lot of places.
Okay, great answer. Well, John Jantsch, thank you very, very much for being with us and sharing your wisdom and perspective. A really interesting conversation. And if people want to contact you or reach out to you, where can they find you?
Easiest place is just ducttapemarketing.com. You can see everything I've been doing for the last few decades, and it's DUCTTAPE marketing.com.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, John. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.